Hello, beautiful people. I'm here today to do a deep dive of Tiff and Mildred's relationship. I will cover episodes 1 through 6 in this video, and then a separate video for episodes 7 through 9 because Tiff and Mildred deserve 2 videos just to themselves. There's a lot of content to cover. We can learn a lot from them. This couple is the one that subscribers have been requesting the most for me to do an analysis of. They are one of 5 couples on Queer Love, The Ultimatum. My name is Catherine Sloan. I've been a licensed therapist for 20 years. I'm married to a wonderful woman and we have 4 kids. Please like and subscribe to my channel. I want to offer a trigger warning because we will be talking about trauma and abuse. So if you aren't in a place to listen to that right now, then make sure you take care of yourself. There are a few main topics we will take a look at here. We're going to take a look at C-PTSD, which stands for Complex Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder, and how it affects the nervous system and leads to certain types of defense mechanisms. I'll be showing you a graph of what we call the window of tolerance that shows how we can end up stuck in something called hyperarousal or survival mode, which can cause us to be very reactive and defensive. And we will be looking at a form of communication called passive-aggressive communication and defining what this is. And we will also take a look at something called trauma bonding. So again, trigger warning, if you aren't in a place to hear these things, please go take care of yourself, or if there's kids around, you might not want to listen to this with kids around. I also want to add that I realize I don't know everything about this couple, not even close. I'm only getting these small edited snippets of their lives. I don't know details about their family of origin issues or other possible mental health issues going on, but I can still point out patterns of behaviors that I see that are indicative of certain problems and explain to you how these issues might have manifested, with the goal being that maybe we can all learn something. Maybe we see ourselves in these people, or maybe we're in these types of relationships. And I am totally fine if anybody disagrees with me or has a different perspective. I don't have the need to be right. So if you see things differently, please comment and let me know, or if you have something to add. I'm very aware that I don't know everything. So let's jump right in. Tiff is 32 years old and Mildred is 33 years old. They've been dating about 2 years. They met on an Instagram hashtag called Lesbian Latinas.
I actually found her on an Instagram hashtag. That's really embarrassing. The hashtag was Lesbian Latina. I was lonely, single. I wouldn't say thirsty, but a little part.
Mildred has issued the ultimatum because she says she is ready to get married to Tiff. Tiff says they aren't ready to marry yet because of their communication pattern being so problematic. In these first 2 episodes, we see them describing their dynamics.
Love and hate that Mildred is spicy as hell. But who wants to date a boring person? I already miss you, babe. I already miss you.
Tiff likes to talk about their sexual energy and how passionate they can be, and it's obvious they do have a lot of sexual attraction for each other. In episode 2 and 3, they go on their dates and start to connect with others. Mildred connects most with Aussie and they move in together for their trial marriage. And we're going to take a look at Mildred and Aussie's dynamics first. Initially, Aussie and Mildred seem to have a sweet connection. They're smiling a lot and they're joking.
So much, and then it just happened. Today was such a good day. Oh yeah. I was getting moments of like, you're making me think about all this stuff. Marriage and about like what we're doing.
The first week is pretty non-eventful from what we see in the clips, but right before the group night out, Aussie says to Mildred something like, you say things on camera that make me look bad.
It's like considerate of other people. I feel like you say shit on camera to make me look bad, mate. It's something that's been bothering me. Oh yeah?
Mildred defends herself, but I was curious about this. I wanted to know more and wish they had discussed it more, but Aussie can't hold the space to have that conversation in that moment. I get the feeling that some tension is building between them. Then they meet Mo, Aussie's friend, and Aussie makes the statement to Mo that being married is like being stuck with someone forever. And even if it was just in a joking way, I sense that Mildred got very triggered by this statement. Keep in mind that Mildred leans towards an anxious attachment style, possibly a disorganized attachment style, but leaning anxious. So any sign of somebody not committing or distancing themselves is going to trigger something internally for her. And I did a whole video on the anxious avoidant trap if anybody wants to go back and watch that, because I go into detail about this pattern and how it's showing up in most of the couples on Queer Love. The dynamics between Aussie and Mildred seem difficult for them to manage because what I see is that they're both living in what we call survival mode or hyper-arousal states. They both have strong protector parts, but they are acted out in different ways to protect themselves from pain. And I want to explain to you the window of tolerance here so you can understand what I'm talking about, and this will be useful later when we talk about Tiff too. And this is honestly just useful information for everybody to know. Here's a graph of the window of tolerance. This is from Dan Siegel, who is a well-known psychiatrist and author, and he was Chelsea Handler's therapist, and she talks openly about him and doing therapy with him, so that gives him credit. If you notice the yellow line, this is how our moods can shift throughout the day. We can tolerate some minor highs and lows throughout the day and still stay grounded, flexible, able to self-regulate, be present and open and curious. If something major happens like an emergency, we can move into hyper-arousal state, which is the red area you see above the window of tolerance. This is the fight-flight mode, and it is very useful when there's actually a reason to go into fight-flight mode, like if somebody's breaking into my house, or if I find out my family was in an accident or something. In this mode, we can feel anxious and have anger and feel chaotic, and we can move into action to get things done quickly. But then we move back down into the window of tolerance where we can regulate ourselves better, and we can usually move in and out of these states, pretty easily. We can also move into hypoarousal, which is the freeze state, and that's the lower half of the chart. This is when someone can numb out, dissociate, feel depressed, and withdraw. We all have a different size window of tolerance. Typically, someone with childhood trauma is going to have a smaller window of tolerance, which means they will be triggered quickly and move into hypo or hyperarousal quickly. With this, we say that someone's internal alarm system is overactive. When someone has C-PTSD or complex PTSD, they can have difficulty controlling their emotions and feel distrustful towards the world. And this is due to chronic trauma, not just one traumatic experience. Here's another graph again adapted from Dan Siegel. This shows how someone can get stuck on hyperarousal and then dip quickly into hypoarousal and stay stuck in that state. When somebody is stuck in hyperarousal, we say they are stuck in survival mode. This means they always feel hypervigilant. There's a lot of anxious energy. They can't seem to relax. A lot of people with C-PTSD struggle with these symptoms. Both Mildred and Aussie have a small window of tolerance, so they are going to spend a lot of time in hyperarousal and unable to regulate their nervous system. This is why they trigger each other so quickly, but with them, Aussie goes into flight mode while Mildred goes into fight. Mildred gets argumentative and provokes fights while Aussie goes into flight and leaves the situation. Now, these are all protective mechanisms that are adapted from childhood, probably due to unresolved childhood trauma, but they don't serve a good purpose anymore and now are causing more harm than good. In episode 5, Mildred then wants to have a discussion about their communication pattern, but Aussie can't handle any sort of confrontation and decides to leave.
Actually, both signed up for this, so
We did sign up for it. I'm not saying that I didn't. I'm just saying I'm surprised.
you're surprised. Okay, that's a good feeling to have.
Then Aussie comes back the next day and packs their stuff and leaves for the last week of the trial marriage. And Aussie leaves a note. This is when we see Mildred have a cathartic moment where she cries and explains that she was abandoned by her mother and then her father left. And she also lost her godmother at 4 years old.
All of these like feelings from like being abandoned in my life. You know, my mother abandoned me when I was 5 years old, and then my father left, and then, you know.
She feels like she can't trust anyone to stay. She says, I don't want to be here all alone. So this was episode 5, and it helps us to better understand how Mildred ended up with such strong defense mechanisms. We learned that she has a lot of unresolved childhood trauma with a huge fear of abandonment. This fear is overwhelming for her, and unfortunately what tends to happen in these situations is people will actually play out the narrative they believe about themselves to be true. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. We tend to subconsciously recreate the experiences we had in childhood because that's what feels familiar to us. It's possible that Mildred believes that she can't trust anyone and no one will ever truly love her, so she creates situations that carry out this narrative and she ends up pushing people away. In episode 6, in the changeover episode where they are all sitting together as a group, Mildred tells Aussie that she felt she was gentle with Aussie. And she says to Aussie, my mother abandoned me and you repeated that pattern for me. It's interesting here because it does seem like Mildred perceives herself to be gentle and maybe she doesn't have insight into her sarcasm or passive-aggressive behaviors. It's possibly a blind spot that she has, and we all have blind spots. Then we see that Tiff gets angry at Aussie for leaving the trial marriage and says, how could you do that? So you could say that there are two perspectives here. One's that Aussie did what was best for their mental health in that moment to get out of the situation they felt was toxic for them. The other perspective is that Aussie is being avoidant by not staying and trying to work through these communication issues with Mildred. They're both really acting out their unresolved childhood traumas, just in different ways. I also want to add that it's not anyone else's responsibility to heal Mildred's childhood trauma. Aussie has childhood trauma too and doesn't say to Mildred, I grew up with abuse and you repeated that pattern for me. Although we can have some sympathy for Mildred for sure, and we can have sympathy that she has unresolved childhood trauma, but it's also her responsibility as an adult to learn how to manage these patterns and heal herself. So she's got a lot of work to do on that. Now let's go back to episode 3 to watch what happens in Tiff and Sam's trial marriage. Tiff and Sam do choose each other, but we see this very, very emotional outpouring where Tiff says she's really just in love with Mildred and has already realized that she needs to lean more into love.
I'm so in love with Mildred. I'm just so in love with her. It's just...
This scene shows how emotionally invested Tiff is and how hard this process is for them. And there's some real fear here. It can be really scary to think that your partner might be about to connect with someone else and you might be losing them. Then Mildred gets angry and walks out because she says she's never seen this side of Tiff. And I couldn't quite figure this part out, but there could be a few things happening here in a lot of clips we didn't see. One is that Tiff has an extreme fear of losing Mildred, and the thought of possibly losing her causes extreme anxiety. And for some people with trauma, anxiety can feel like love. And I don't know that Tiff has unresolved trauma, so this is just a possibility. It's mere speculation. I'd really just be curious to know. I'm also getting this feeling that Tiff might be thinking, if only I would just try harder. And she says, I just need to lean more into love. There could also be a trauma bond here. So let's talk about trauma bonding. A trauma bond is a psychological response that happens when an abused person develops an unhealthy attachment to their abuser. Common signs of a trauma bond are dependency on the abuser and making excuses or defending the abuser. Now, contrary to popular belief, it does not describe a shared connection between two victims of trauma. it actually describes a bond or connection with the perpetrator of the abuse. One might try to rationalize or justify the abuse they are experiencing from an emotional attachment to the abuser. It involves a cycle of abuse and then strong positive reinforcement, which makes it very difficult to leave the relationship. And it's very interesting how this happens. So researchers think that because of the hormones that are released due to the cycle of abuse, a person can actually get addicted to the roller coaster ride that comes along with these types of relationships. And even though the abuse feels terrible, a person can become addicted to the attention they get after the abuse and the dopamine rush of the reconnection after the abuse occurs. Now this trauma bonding can be involved with cults, human trafficking, with narcissistic abusive relationships, and other forms of, it can even be like with employers actually. Tiff and Sam move in together and it's rocky at first. We see their first major conflict when discussing the dog sleeping in the bed. Now, I think every lesbian couple or queer couple has probably had this discussion, including me and my wife. It does seem like Sam is not completely opposed to the dog sleeping in the bed, and she is open to figuring it out, but Tiff seems to view her lack of excitement about Shiloh as rejection or some sort of fear. Tiff says that their dog is like their child, and many of us feel this way, right? I'm sure a lot of people watching can relate. Tiff sets a real clear boundary about it.
System, if you don't like my dog, you can get the fuck out.
What I see that could be happening here is that Tiff is so used to having to be on the defensive that they just can't relax. Tiff also seems to be stuck in survival mode here, just as we talked about previously with the window of tolerance with the graph. Their nervous system could be stuck in hypervigilance or survival mode. It seems like Tiff is just expecting something to go wrong, so they're already starting an argument. They're not operating within their window of tolerance to be able to be open and curious about finding solutions to this problem. So in this situation, it's not just about Shiloh, there's something else here that's being triggered for Tiff. They don't seem able to differentiate here between what's going on in their internal world versus the reality of the situation. Tiff does seem to be jumping to conclusions about Sam's view of the dog, and I'll show a few clips of them fighting about the dog.
Trial marriage. Yeah. And Shiloh is non-negotiable.
In a healthy relationship, when issues like this come up and two people can usually stay within their window of tolerance to have these discussions, they can usually try to work together as a team to understand perspective and have some compromises. Then we start to see a shift with Tiff and Sam. There's a really cute scene of them just riding in the car talking about Disney movies. It was really nice to see them both smiling and laughing. It seems like Tiff is eventually able to relax and just be more at ease. They can talk through issues better and really listen to each other over time. Because Sam has a different communication style than Mildred, it seems to be an easier dynamic. They meet up with Tiff's friend Natasha, who's a very direct communicator and expresses her concerns about Tiff and Mildred.
It's not going to be the last time. They're very on and off. I don't think it's healthy. I don't think that Tiff and Mildred are right for each other because they can't communicate.
It's pretty obvious that Tiff and Sam don't have a physical attraction. They do try to spoon on their last night together, but it's just really comical. I can appreciate that they aren't trying to force anything to happen. So it seems like they both end up learning a lot in this trial marriage. At one point, Tiff says, "I feel safe bringing myself to the table." They both feel heard by each other. Sam is able to find her voice, and Tiff can let their guard down and know how it feels to be with someone who's less antagonistic. In episode 6, called The Changeover, we see Tiff and Mildred reconnecting, and they meet back up again with Natasha. Natasha is Tiff's friend, and this is when we learn how much they actually did break up, and it's very alarming.
And then said 2 years.
Once a week? Really?
Like
Not
I would
once a
say
week.
Maybe once every 2 weeks. So at least 50 breakups.
You think that, like, you're not gonna break up once a week. If you leave engaged, you think that it will make you...
Tiff says they break up every week or every 2 weeks, so they probably had 50 breakups in the 2 years that they've been together. Then Natasha poses the question, do you think you're not going to be breaking up anymore if you actually get engaged? And this is a wonderful question because just getting engaged or married to someone doesn't make problems go away. And just knowing this information about how much they fight and break up, it helps me to speculate what might be going on here and why Tiff has been so reluctant to get married. People who are emotionally healthy usually don't want to marry someone they have this much conflict with unless there's a trauma bond that keeps them together, and for some reason they think this type of relationship is okay and normal. I said in one of my other videos that sometimes people who had a lot of chaos in their families growing up will feel more connected when there's chaos in their relationship because they mistake the feeling of anxiety and fear with love. And some people will even provoke a fight so they can have those intense feelings. It can be addictive. That could be a familiar feeling for Mildred and Tiff, and we do tend to crave familiarity. We also see in this exchange with Natasha that Mildred thinks she did learn how to communicate better in her trial marriage, but then immediately proceeds to cut Tiff off right afterwards.
Like I tell Tiff, like, hey, like if you see that I'm tired, if you see that like I'm stressed out, like help me out, you know? But yeah, sorry, really passionate about it.
Yeah. The way I see it.
Maybe she's just saying this because she wants Natasha to support them or maybe give Tiff more hope. Who knows? It could be so many different things. They also say that they tried therapy and the therapist couldn't work with them, and Natasha makes a funny comment that they were fired by their therapist.
Together. Like, why not try couples therapy?
Natasha,
Why, like, let's date other women?
We went to couples therapy and
We went
How was it?
to couples
the
therapy.
therapist gave up on us.
She fired you. You know that, right?
And I want to add here that it can be very hard to work. It can be hard work for the therapist to do couples therapy with clients who talk over each other and interrupt each other and get really loud. We do set up ground rules in the beginning of sessions so that there are guidelines for giving each person time to talk. And part of the process is learning reflective listening and learning not to interrupt. And I would just love to know what happened in their therapy sessions and why the therapist couldn't work with them anymore. I have ended up referring couples out because I felt like I was not a good fit for them, and maybe that's what happened. I just wonder how many sessions they had and what they worked on. This just leaves me with so many questions. I wish I could ask them what happened with their therapy sessions. And that's the end of episode 6. I have a lot more to say about their interactions in episodes 7 through 9, so please watch the rest of my analysis in my next video. If you've realized that you struggle with CPTSD, please know that you're not alone. Reach out to a therapist for support. I will leave a list of therapy providers in my description of this video, and we do have many therapeutic interventions to help people heal from childhood trauma. Thanks for watching this, and this is your reminder to go drink a big glass of water and take a deep breath, and I'll see you next time.